10-5. Judge orders integration. Arkansas Gazette, September 3rd, 1957. Dear Diary, it's happening today. What I'm afraid of most is that they won't like me and integration won't work, and Little Rock won't become like Cincinnati, Ohio. As we walked down the front steps, Mother paused and turned to look back at Grandma, who was standing at the edge of the porch. In their glance, I saw the fear they had never voiced in front of me. Grandma lingered for a moment, and then rushed to encircle me in her arms once more. God is always with you, she whispered, as she blinked back tears. Trailing behind Mother, I made my way down the concrete path as she climbed into the driver's seat behind the wheel of our green Pontiac. I don't know why I veered off the sidewalk, taking the shortcut through the wet grass that would make damp stains on my saddle shoes. Perhaps I wanted some reason not to go to the integration. I knew if Grandma noticed, she would force me to go back and polish my shoes all over again. But she was so preoccupied she didn't say a word. As I climbed into the passenger seat, I looked back to see her leaning against the porch column, her face weary, her eyes filled with tears. Mother pressed the gas pedal, and we gained speed. I always watched closely because I wanted my license by my 16th birthday, only 3 months away. I knew the process well by now. She had guided me through practice sessions in the parking lot next to the grocery store often enough. We moved through the streets in silence, listening to the newsmen's descriptions of the crowds gathering at Central High. I noticed some of our neighbors standing on the sidewalk, many more than were usually out this time of day. That's strange, Mama mumbled as she waved to people who didn't bother waving back. No matter, maybe they didn't see me. Our neighbors had always been so friendly, but now they peered at us without their usual smiles. Then I saw Kathy and Rhonda, 2 of my school friends, standing with their mothers. Anxious to catch their attention, I waved out the window, with a loud hi. Their disapproving glances matched those of the adults. I didn't do anything to them, I said, not understanding their reason. Then you don't have anything to be concerned about. Mother Lois maneuvered through the unusually heavy traffic. I don't know where all the cars could have come from, she said. We both craned our necks, curious about all the unfamiliar cars and people. Certainly there had never before been so many white people driving down the streets of our quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. The voice on the radio grew more urgent as the announcer described the ranks of Arkansas National Guardsmen who ringed Central High School. Hearing the news as we drew near our destination, Mother said, I think I'll park here. The meeting place is quite a ways away, but from the looks of things we won't get any closer. The announcer said it was 7:55 as Mama squeezed into a parking space, and we settled ourselves quietly for a moment, trying to identify the buzzing noise that seemed as if it were all around us. It resembled the sound of crowds at my high school football games, but how could that be? The announcer said there was a crowd, but surely it couldn't be that big. Well, I guess we better get going. Mother was squinting, cupping her hands over her eyes to protect them against the glare of sunlight. A stream of white people were hurrying past us in the direction of Central High, so many that some had to walk on the grass and in the street. We stepped out of the car and into their strange parade, walking in silence in the midst of their whispers and glares. Anxious to see the familiar faces of our friends or some of our own people, we hurried up the block lined with wood frame houses and screened in porches. I strained to see what lay ahead of us. In the distance, large crowds of white people were lining the curb directly across from the front of Central High. As we approached behind them, we could see only the clusters of white people that stretched for a distance of 2 blocks along the entire span of the school building. My mind could take in the sights and sounds only one by one, flashing cameras, voices, shouting in my ears, men and women jostling each other, old people, young people, people running, uniformed police officers walking, men standing still, men and women waving their fists. And then the long line of uniformed soldiers carrying weapons just like in the war movies I had seen. Everyone's attention seemed riveted on the center of the line of soldiers where a big commotion was taking place. At first, we couldn't see what they were looking at. People were shouting and pointing, and the noise hurt my ears and muffled the words. We couldn't understand what they were saying. As we near, the angry outbursts became even more intense, and we began to hear their words more clearly. Niggers, go home. Niggers, go back where you belong. Drew. I stood motionless, stunned by the hurtful words. I searched for something to hang on to, something familiar that would comfort me or make sense, but there was nothing. 2, 4, 6, 8. We ain't gonna integrate. Over. The words rang out. The terrifying frenzy of the crowd was building like steam in an erupting volcano. We have to find the others, Mama yelled in my ear. We'll be safer with the group. She grabbed my arm to pull me forward, out of my trance. The look on her face mirrored the terror I felt. Some of the white men and women standing around us seemed to be observing anxiously. Others with angry faces and wide open mouths were screaming their rage. Their words were becoming increasingly vile, fueled by whatever was happening directly in front of the school. The sun beat down on our heads as we made our way through the crowd searching for our friends. Most people ignored us, jostling each other and craning their necks to see whatever was at the center of the furor. Finally, we got closer to the hub of activity. Standing on our toes, we stretched as tall as we could to see what everyone was watching. Oh, my lord, Mother said. It was my friend Elizabeth they were watching. The anger of that huge crowd was directed toward Elizabeth Eckford as she stood alone, in front of Central High, facing the long line of soldiers, with a huge crowd of white people screeching at her back. Barely 5 feet tall, Elizabeth cradled her books in her arms as she desperately searched for the right place to enter. Soldiers in uniforms and helmets, cradling their rifles, towered over her. Slowly, she walked first to one and then another opening in their line. Each time she approached, the soldiers closed ranks, shutting her out. As she turned toward us, her eyes hidden by dark glasses, we could see how erect and proud she stood, despite the fear she must have been feeling. As Elizabeth walked along the line of guardsmen, they did nothing to protect her from her stalkers. When a crowd of 50 or more closed in like diving vultures, the soldiers stared straight ahead, as if posing for a photograph. Once more, Elizabeth stood still, stunned, not knowing what to do. The people surrounding us shouted, stomped, and whistled as though her awful predicament were a triumph for them. I wanted to help her, but the human wall in front of us would not be moved. We could only wedge through partway. Finally, we realized our efforts were futile. We could only pray as we watched her struggle to survive. People began to applaud and shout, "Get her! Get the nigger out of there! Hang her black ass!" Not one of those white adults attempted to rescue Elizabeth. The hulking soldiers continued to observe her peril like spectators enjoying a sport. Under siege, Elizabeth slowly made her way toward the bench at the bus stop. Looking straight ahead as she walked, she did not acknowledge the people yelping at her heels, like mad dogs. Mother and I looked at one another, suddenly conscious that we, too, were trapped by a violent mob. Ever so slowly, we eased our way backward through the crowd, being careful not to attract attention. But a white man clawed at me, grabbing my sleeve and yelling, "We got us a nigger right here." Just then another man tugged at his arm, distracting him. Somehow I managed to scramble away. As a commotion began building around us, Mother took my arm, and we moved fast, sometimes crouching to avoid attracting more attention. We gained some distance from the center of the crowd and made our way down the block. But when I looked back, I saw a man following us, yelling, "They're getting away. Those niggers are getting away." Pointing to us, he enlisted others to join him. Now we were being chased by 4 men, and their number was growing. We scurried down the sidewalk, bumping into people. Most of the crowd was still preoccupied watching Elizabeth. Panic-stricken, I wanted to shout for help, but I knew it would do no good. Policemen stood by watching Elizabeth being accosted. Why would they help us? "Melba, take these keys," Mother commanded as she tossed them at me. "Get to the car. Leave without me if you have to." I plucked the car keys from the air. "No, Mama, I won't go without you." Suddenly I felt the sting of her hand as it struck the side of my face. She had never slapped me before. "Do what I say," she shouted. Still, I knew I couldn't leave her there. I reached back to take her arm. Her pace was slowing, and I tried to pull her forward. The men were gaining on us. If we yelled for help or made any fuss, others might join our attackers. Running faster, I felt myself begin to wear out. I didn't have enough breath to keep moving so fast. My knees hurt, my calves were aching, but the car was just around the next corner. The men chasing us were joined by another carrying a rope. At times, our pursuers were so close I could look back and see the anger in their eyes. Mama's pace slowed, and one man came close enough to touch her. He grabbed for her arm but instead tugged at her blouse. The fabric ripped, and he fell backward. Mama stepped out of her high-heeled shoes, leaving them behind, her pace quickening in stocking feet. One of the men closest to me swung at me with a large tree branch but missed. I felt even more panic rise up in my throat. If he hit me hard enough to knock me over, I would be at his mercy. I could hear Grandma India's voice saying, "God is always with you, even when things seem awful." I felt a surge of strength and a new wind. As I turned the corner, our car came into sight. I ran hard, faster than ever before, unlocked the door, and jumped in. Mother was struggling, barely able to keep ahead of her attackers. I could see them turning the corner close on her heels, moving fast toward us. I swung open the passenger door for Mother and revved the engine. Barely waiting for her to shut the door, I shoved the gear shift into reverse and backed down the street with more speed than I'd ever driven forward. I slowed to back around the corner. One of the men caught up and pounded his fists on the hood of our car, while another threw a brick at the windshield. Turning left, we gained speed as we drove through a hail of shouts and stones and glaring faces. But I knew I would make it because the car was moving fast, and Mama was with me.